The Indus Valley Script. Around 4,500 years ago, one of history's largest and most sophisticated civilizations stretched across what is now Pakistan and northwestern India. The Indus Valley Civilization, also called the Harappan Civilization, built cities with flush toilets, grid-planned streets, and advanced trade networks. They also left behind writing. Thousands of inscriptions survive on seals, pottery, and copper tablets. The problem? Not a single person alive today can read them. Scholars have identified roughly 400 to 700 distinct signs, too many for a pure alphabet, too few for a fully logographic system like early Chinese. Attempts to decode it have been made by linguists, mathematicians, and even AI algorithms. All have failed. The most tantalizing mystery is that we don't even know what language family it belongs to. Some argue it reflects an ancestor of Dravidian languages. Others say it might be an early Indo-European tongue. A few controversial voices claim it isn't writing at all, just symbols. That last theory has been largely dismissed, but the debate alone tells you everything about how little we know. The fascinating detail, the script seems to have died out abruptly around 1900 BCE, possibly when the civilization itself collapsed, perhaps due to climate shifts or river changes. Nobody passed it down, nobody left a key, it simply stopped. Proto-Elamite. This is actually the world's oldest undeciphered writing system, predating even some early Egyptian hieroglyphs. Proto-Elamite emerged in what is now southwestern Iran and spread rapidly across a huge region, making it one of the most geographically widespread early scripts in history. Over 1,600 tablets survive. Researchers believe it was primarily an accounting system, tracking grain, livestock, and goods across administrative centers. It likely evolved from even earlier token-based record-keeping. The signs include numerals that scholars can partially read, but the rest of the symbols remain opaque. The core problem is that Proto-Elamite shows enormous variation between tablets. Scribes seem to write inconsistently, with few standardized sign forms, which makes pattern recognition a nightmare. The fascinating detail: a major Oxford-led project digitized and analyzed the entire corpus using advanced imaging and computational tools. They made progress and then hit a wall. The script may have been so loosely standardized that it functionally resists decipherment without a bilingual text. Linear A. Here's where things get genuinely maddening for historians. We can read a related script, Linear B, which was deciphered in 1952 by architect Michael Ventris and found to represent early Greek. Linear B was directly adapted from Linear A, so we know the sound values of many Linear A signs. We can even pronounce some Linear A words, we just have absolutely no idea what they mean. Linear A was used by the Minoan civilization of ancient Crete, a culture with palace complexes, elaborate frescoes, and rich trade connections. When the Mycenaean Greeks took over and adapted Minoan writing, they changed the underlying language entirely, so we're left with a script we can partially sound out, attached to a language with no known relatives. It's like being able to read a foreign book phonetically but understanding 0% of the content. The fascinating detail: when scholars applied Linear B phonetic values to Linear A texts, one word, ja-sa-ra, appears repeatedly in ritual contexts and may mean something like lady or a goddess title. That single tantalizing fragment is about as far as we've gotten. The Voynich Manuscript. Yes, this one is medieval, not ancient, but it belongs on this list because it is possibly the most analyzed undeciphered text in human history. The Voynich Manuscript is a 240-page illustrated codex written on vellum, carbon-dated to approximately 1404-1438 CE. It was purchased by rare book dealer Wilfrid Voynich in 1912 and has tortured cryptographers, linguists, and historians ever since. The script flows left to right, shows consistent letter frequencies, and exhibits statistical properties of natural language, suggesting it's not random gibberish. The illustrations show plants that don't match any known species, astronomical diagrams, and human figures in strange circular pools. Every serious theory about its origin has been proposed: an invented language, an encrypted European language, a herbal medical text, an elaborate hoax. Even World War II codebreakers at the NSA tried and gave up. The fascinating detail: statistical analysis has shown the manuscript's language follows Zipf's law, the mathematical pattern that almost all natural human languages obey. That means it's either real language or the most sophisticated fake ever constructed. Rongorongo, Easter Island, Rapa Nui, is already famous for its enormous stone statues, but the islanders also developed one of only a handful of writing systems ever independently invented in human history. Rongorongo is a system of glyphs carved into wooden tablets, and it appears to have emerged without outside influence, a remarkable cognitive and cultural achievement. The tragedy is almost Shakespearean in its cruelty. When Christian missionaries arrived in the 19th century, they considered the tablets idolatrous and ordered them burned. Peruvian slave raiders then kidnapped most of Rapa Nui's literate population, including virtually everyone who could read Rongorongo. By the time anyone thought to ask, the knowledge was gone. Only 26 tablets survive worldwide, scattered across museums from London to St. Petersburg. The fascinating detail: one section of a tablet appears to correlate with a lunar calendar related to planting cycles. Researchers identified a repeating sequence of glyphs that matches a 29 to 30-day lunar month pattern. So we might know what one passage tracks, we still can't read the words. Proto-Sinaitic. Here's one with a plot twist. Proto-Sinaitic is technically partially deciphered. Scholars believe they understand the general principle behind it, but individual inscriptions remain deeply contested, making full decipherment impossible. And the stakes could not be higher. This may be the origin of every alphabet used on Earth today. Discovered in Egyptian turquoise mines at Sarabed el-Qadim, the inscriptions were likely made by Semitic workers around 1850 BCE. The theory, first proposed by Egyptologist Alan Gardner, is that these workers took Egyptian hieroglyphic symbols and repurposed them as sound signs for their own Semitic language, creating the world's first alphabet. That proto-alphabet then evolved into Phoenician, which became Greek, which became Latin, which became the text you're reading right now. The fascinating detail: one frequently recurring phrase in Proto-Sinaitic inscriptions has been tentatively read as Bayalit, meaning the lady, likely a reference to a goddess. If correct, the very first alphabetic texts ever written were prayers scratched into mine walls by ancient laborers. Meroitic. The Kushite kingdom of Meroe in what is now Sudan was a major African civilization. It built more pyramids than Egypt, traded across vast networks, and developed its own writing system completely distinct from Egyptian hieroglyphs. Meroitic has two forms, a hieroglyphic version and a cursive version. It has been phonetically deciphered, meaning we can read it aloud. We understand almost nothing of what it says. This is exactly the same trap as Linear A. Scholars cracked the sound values in the late 19th century using a bilingual inscription. But Meroitic represents a language with no confirmed relatives. Researchers have worked out some words. Kor likely means king, Kikti likely means queen, but coherent translation of full text remains out of reach. The fascinating detail: thousands of funerary inscriptions exist. We can pronounce the names of the dead. We can read the sounds of what were likely prayers for the afterlife. But we cannot tell those people what their own epitaphs say. Elamite Linear. Not to be confused with Proto-Elamite, Linear Elamite is a separate later script, also from ancient Iran, that has resisted decipherment for over a century. It appears on royal inscriptions, prestige objects, and ceremonial items, suggesting it was used for important official or religious content rather than mundane accounting. Then, in 2022, a team of French and Iranian researchers announced a major breakthrough. Using a set of newly discovered silver vessels with bilingual inscriptions, effectively mini Rosetta Stones, they claimed to have substantially deciphered Linear Elamite for the first time. The script appears to represent an early form of the Elamite language, which is itself a language isolate with no relatives. The fascinating detail: the breakthrough was real but incomplete. Researchers could now read many signs, but significant portions of the corpus still resist full translation. Linear Elamite went from totally undeciphered to partially cracked almost overnight, proving that a single bilingual inscription can unravel millennia of silence. The Phaistos Disc. This is the most famous single undeciphered object in the world. Found in a Minoan palace on Crete in 1908, the Phaistos Disc is covered in 241 symbols across 61 groups, stamped in a spiral pattern on both sides. The symbols were made with individual punches, making this potentially the oldest example of movable type printing in history. Decipherment attempts number in the hundreds. Proposed solutions include a prayer, a hymn, a geographic list, a military document, and a board game. The problem is that 241 symbols is simply too small a sample to crack an unknown script statistically. Without more examples or a bilingual text, cryptographic techniques hit a hard limit. The disc is so unique, nothing quite like it has been found anywhere else, that some scholars have asked whether it was an import from an entirely unknown civilization. The fascinating detail. A 2018 study by an Oxford academic proposed that the disc is a prayer to a Minoan goddess of war, and that one repeated symbol sequence reads as Great Lady of the Underworld. The academic community remains deeply skeptical. Nobody agrees on anything. That disc just sits in a museum in Heraklion, spinning its silent spiral. Olmec Writing. The Olmec were Mesoamerica's first major civilization, the cultural bedrock from which Maya and Aztec civilizations later grew. In 2006, archaeologists reported discovering what may be the oldest writing in the Western Hemisphere, the el-Hol block, a stone tablet covered in 62 undeciphered signs. Some appear to be insects, plants, or geometric forms. The block's authenticity was initially contested, but it is now widely accepted as genuine. Whether it represents a true writing system or proto-writing is still debated. If it is real writing, it predates all other confirmed Mesoamerican scripts and could rewrite the history of how civilization developed in the Americas. The fascinating detail: the Olmec had no known descendants who preserved their language or traditions. When their civilization declined, their writing, if that's what it is, went with them. We don't even know what language they spoke. Byblos Syllabary. The ancient Phoenician city of Byblos, one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities on Earth, gave us its own undeciphered script. The Byblos Syllabary, also called pseudo-hieroglyphic script, appears on around 10 inscriptions and has resisted all decipherment despite Byblos's central position in ancient Mediterranean trade and scholarship. Because Byblos was so deeply connected to both Egypt and the Semitic world, researchers expected decipherment to come easily. It hasn't. The script appears to be a syllabary, where each sign represents a syllable rather than a single sound, but the underlying language remains unknown. Some propose it records a Semitic language, others suggest something entirely different. The fascinating detail: Byblos is the origin of the word Bible. The Greek Byblos means book or papyrus, named after the city that exported writing materials across the ancient world. A city synonymous with the written word left behind, writing nobody can read. Wadi el-Hol. Discovered in 1999 in a remote Egyptian wadi, a dry riverbed, these inscriptions may be the oldest alphabetic writing ever found, potentially even predating Proto-Sinaitic. Carved by Semitic travelers or soldiers passing through Egypt, the Wadi el-Hol inscriptions show signs that appear to be an even earlier stage of that crucial transition from hieroglyphs to alphabet. Only 2 inscriptions exist. They are short, damaged by millennia of desert exposure, and deeply ambiguous. Egyptologist John Coleman Darnell, who discovered them, believes they represent an early consonantal alphabet, a system of just consonants, like early Hebrew or Arabic. His partial readings have been proposed, but not confirmed by the wider scholarly community. The fascinating detail: if the Wadi el-Hol inscriptions are indeed alphabetic, someone carved the conceptual ancestor of every modern Western alphabet onto a cliff wall in a desert, and then the world's sandstorm spent 4,000 years trying to erase the evidence.